Our project is focused on evaluating a common concern of the public involving the COVID-19 vaccine. Some believe that the COVID-19 vaccine development was rushed. We've researched the general vaccine development process in order to compare it to how the COVID-19 vaccine was created. Vaccine development generally takes 10 to 15 years. Research and funding are important aspects in developing any new vaccine. In the image depicted on the slide, it goes through the general process. There's basic research, discovery, preclinical studies that all come before the clinical studies, which are in 3 phases. The FDA is then in charge of reviewing the vaccine and evaluating its safety. And then in phase 4, there is post-approval monitoring and research to guarantee the safety of the vaccine. There are 7 main parts of a vaccine that we learned about, and it includes an antigen, which produces an immune response to fight off future infections, diluent, preservatives, stabilizers, surfactants, residuals, and adjuvant, and all of them play important roles in making sure that the vaccine provides a sufficient immune response. There are different vaccine types, and all of these different aspects of a vaccine need to be determined by the researchers, and then during the clinical studies, they're evaluated to make sure that the vaccine is as safe and efficient as possible.
Normally, once a company has developed and tested a potential vaccine that it wishes to distribute to the public, they submit a biologics license application to the FDA. The FDA then reviews the data and considers the proposed population that will be receiving the potential vaccine. They also consider the risks posed by the disease the vaccine aims to prevent. After these considerations, they approve or decline the proposed vaccine. This process can take quite a while. The COVID-19 vaccines have been authorized under an emergency use authorization. Emergency use authorization is allowed if the Secretary of Health and Human Services declares that there's a public health emergency. This gives the FDA the ability to allow the use of unapproved products or the unapproved use of an approved product to treat the disease. The FDA reviews the data for a vaccine, and if they feel that the benefits outweigh the risks, then they will grant this authorization. This gives the FDA the ability to quickly release a vaccine or treatment during a time of emergency. However, this authorization can be revoked at any time. And although these vaccines have been authorized for emergency use, they still have to go through the same trials to ensure their safety before they are given this authorization. The FDA continues to monitor if there are potential adverse effects. It does this through passive and active surveillance. Passive surveillance are reports filed by the public either through the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System or through a text-based monitoring system called vSafe. Active surveillance includes the FDA and the CDC's proactive effort of obtaining information from healthcare data systems. These systems include the Sentinel-BEST system and the CMS system.
When it comes to developing a vaccine for a particular virus, the overarching issue that affects this process is how much of a threat is the new virus. In other words, how many people are being infected and dying to this new virus? This plays a significant role in the major aspects of developing a vaccine from this point on. Those being the amount of knowledge available on the virus in question, the amount of available funds to go towards producing a new vaccine, and the stringent process of going through all the steps necessary to produce a safe and effective vaccine that can be administered to the general public. Compared to other pandemics in the past, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significantly higher transmission rate. Since January of 2020, there have been more than 30 million reported cases of COVID-19, accompanied by over 500,000 deaths in the United States alone. To put this in perspective, the H1N1 swine flu outbreak of 2009 had a reported 60 million cases with 75,000 deaths in the US. This showed that the COVID-19 virus was a much greater threat as it had a significantly higher death rate than the past major outbreak. The next big factor is the amount of information that is available. Because the new virus was quickly seen to be an issue, scientists got to work right away to begin learning as much as possible. There was a lot of research put into learning about the new virus, and as early as January 11, 2020, the genetic sequence of the virus was published for worldwide use. This then allowed companies to begin engineering a vaccine for the virus. The next hurdle that had to be overcome was money necessary for the vaccine to be developed. The previously mentioned H1N1 vaccine used over $6 billion when all was said and done. In contrast, the US government alone has spent more than $22 billion funding the development, production, and distribution of effective COVID-19 vaccines. This has helped expedite the vaccine-making process by a great degree. The last major hurdle that must be overcome is the approval process of the vaccine. This is what has the biggest impact on how long it takes to develop a safe and effective vaccine. As was previously discussed, there is a process that must occur in order for a vaccine to be developed. However, in the instance of the COVID-19 virus, circumstances were such that the normal process was expedited. We will now look into how this process varied compared to past vaccine developments.
Now we'll look into the development of vaccines. The average vaccine takes between 10 to 15 years to complete development and become ready for the public. SARS-CoV-2, however, was much faster, the fastest vaccine to ever have been created. It only took 9 months from the start of its development to the end of its completion. Comparatively, measles was previously the fastest vaccine to be developed at only 4 years. Ebola was another fast vaccine to be created, and this vaccine took 5 years. Finally, polio, which was one of the earliest vaccines, took 20 years to develop. Now, why was the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine able to be completed so quickly? There are 2 reasons for this. The first was that there was already research done on the SARS coronaviruses. In the first SARS coronavirus, there was research done on its spike protein. This research found that the spike protein was one of the parts of the virus that elicited an immune response. When the outbreak of SARS-CoV-2 began, the researchers who were looking into vaccine development quickly found the data on previous SARS coronavirus spike protein and were able to use that to increase the speed of the development of the new vaccine. Another reason for the vaccine's quick development was because there was already research done to make mRNA vaccines. This meant that the researchers developing the vaccines only needed to find RNA sequences of the spike protein and use that to create an mRNA vaccine. This was a quick process, and they were able to speedily produce the vaccine trials.
There are several different clinical trial phases for a development of a vaccine. It first starts off with the preclinical trial, which is just exploring the drug and see how it may work. And then it gets submitted and the drug will be approved for human testing, which then it leads to phase 1, which is the safety phase, which they use usually 20 to 80 participants. And once that phase is done, usually over days and a few weeks, they move to phase 2, which is also safety and dosing, which goes 100 to 300 participants. And once after that, they move to phase 3, which is safety and efficacy, which seeing that the new drug is being effective and useful, and that can be used from a few hundred to a few thousand participants. And after that phase, the drug is then submitted for FDA approval if that drug is being successful and if their efficacy rates are relatively well. And from that, once the FDA reviews it, and if it's approved, it can move on to phase 4, which is post-approval surveillance, which thousands of participants are able to get the vaccine, get the drug, and are monitored over a period of time. So this is a brief timeline of the clinical trials and what was going on with the COVID-19 virus. So you can see in the very beginning, at the end of 2019, we were alerted that there has been a virus going around in China with an unknown etiology, and that is a respiratory disease affecting a lot of people. And then from that point on, in early January, the first SARS-CoV-2 genome was made public for further research. In early February, Moderna was the first candidate to produce a COVID-19 vaccine, and from that on, they went on through clinical trials. In early March, they were able to do the first phase of their clinical trial, and it was initiated. Starting in April, there was about 115 different vaccine candidates, so different companies and governments that formed vaccines. And as of Mid-May, there were the first results from the phase 1 of the clinical trials of the COVID-19 vaccine, and those were successful, so they continue to go on. As of early July, there was now 157 different vaccine candidates that were initiating the vaccine, so quite a bit of an increase from April. As of mid-July, the first phase 3 clinical trial of the COVID-19 vaccine was initiated, which meant good things because that means that the phases were going well and that they were able to be proceeded through. And as of early September, there was 321 vaccine candidates that were being produced. And within that same month, 9 of those candidate groups were able to enter in phase 3 of clinical trial testing. And as of early December, the FDA was able to approve of several vaccines, the Moderna, Pfizer, and then the Johnson & Johnson was also just released as well. The development of a vaccine through clinical trials can take several years. It usually takes between 5 to 15 years to create an effective vaccine that is safe for the public. But because this virus has affected so many and has spread so quickly, there's been a vast demand for a vaccine. So with that comes shortened phases as well. So you can see in this timeline, in early 2020, the academic research for this vaccine is still an ongoing process. It has not been completely researched. It's still ongoing. And through that, you can see that in clinical trials, there's usually different phases, like I explained in the slide before. But now those phases are being combined, so it can go by a little bit faster. And during those clinical trials, factories are being manufactured in order to produce those vaccines. So they're already planning that they will be successful. And during that, they will produce super quickly and in hopes of approval. And once that is approved, they will be able to distribute the vaccines out as fast as possible. Because at the end of the day, we want everybody to have the opportunity to receive this vaccine. In early clinical trials, only adults were being tested. So anyone from ages 18 to about 55, 60 were being tested. And from those results and those efficacy rates, they were able to distinguish who else they can test. And so they were able to use older individuals because those are who are being affected the most during this pandemic, our older population. The individual populations that were not involved in the COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials were pregnant women and children, as we were just trying to focus on healthy adults and getting that covered first. Now developments and proceedings have been taken forth for testing the vaccine for pregnant women and for children as well. And those results have not been concluded yet, and I'm sure we will be seeing those very soon, since ultimately we want the vaccine to be readily available to everyone.
Many people ask if any steps in the vaccine development process were skipped so the COVID vaccine could be made faster. There weren't any steps that were skipped. Normal vaccines have long waiting periods while the researchers wait for funding or to raise volunteers to test the vaccine, or even to build factories to develop the vaccine. But for the COVID-19 vaccine, we didn't run into any of those roadblocks. We were able to avoid all of them, and so we were able to develop it really, really fast. The important bit is that there were no steps skipped, especially in the safety and efficacy trials. Those maintained their integrity, their results are good, and it shows that the vaccine is safe. So is the vaccine safe? It is according to the data we have from Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson. This vaccine is highly effective in preventing illness from the COVID-19 virus, as well as having low incidence of side effects within recipients. It can have the possibility of making you feel sick or having soreness and pain at the injection site, but those are considered low-grade side effects by the FDA. Another common concern is about the pressure being put on the public to take this vaccine. This vaccine is our best bet at returning back to normal, and we can do that by achieving herd immunity. This is a term that you may have heard thrown around recently, And what it means is that there is a significant portion of the population that is immune to the COVID-19 virus and can act almost as living barriers between those that are susceptible to its illness, and it poses a great risk to them. When we achieve herd immunity, the greater public is safe from this virus, and that's essentially when the pandemic will end. So that is why there's large pressure being put on the public to take this vaccine. When should the public be concerned about medicine being pushed upon them? It's a very valid question, so let's take a look at that. An example of something of this sort would be hydroxychloroquine back in the summer of 2020. Hydroxychloroquine was given an emergency use authorization as well, but it did not have the supporting data that this vaccine has. It was given its EUA 2 weeks after it was originally suggested as a treatment for COVID-19. 2 weeks is not a long enough period of time to conduct a scientifically valid study to determine its efficacy in treatment. Secondly, it didn't have any actual studies done yet. There was no double-blind study, no experiments done by researchers that supported its use in this treatment. And thirdly, the experiences and the supposed evidence that was coming out for it had not been accepted by the scientific community as a whole because it had not been peer-reviewed. And so those three things really should have been red flags. The COVID-19 vaccine, however, does have those things. It did have a long enough period of time to conduct safety trials and efficacy trials. It has the data to support its ability to prevent illness from COVID-19, and it has been peer-reviewed and widely accepted by the scientific community. So that's a very clear example of when we can trust medicine being pushed and when we can't in the case of hydroxychloroquine. After all that we've covered today, we hope that you take away these 4 things from our presentation. First, these vaccines were able to be made in record time because the technology they utilize already existed. Researchers created this technology in preparation for a pandemic event, as we have seen in the past year. Also, the genome for the virus that causes COVID-19 was sequenced very rapidly and shared with researchers around the world, so they could combine the two and make an effective vaccine in record time. Secondly, the COVID-19 vaccines have received emergency use authorization by the Food and Drug Administration of the United States. In order to receive this EUA, vaccines still have to undergo the normal safety and efficacy trials that they would under non-pandemic circumstances, and these vaccines have surpassed those expectations. The FDA will continue to monitor vaccine safety and efficacy going forward. Thirdly, all data we have to current day shows that these vaccines are highly effective at preventing illness due to COVID-19 and are very safe for those that are injected. Flu-like symptoms are common side effects of the vaccines, but are considered by the FDA to be minor and therefore safe. Lastly, research and clinical testing are still ongoing. Researchers are now seeking to show that the vaccines are as safe and effective in specialized populations as they are in the average healthy adult. Those specialized populations being pregnant women, children, and those that are immunocompromised. We hope that this presentation has helped address some of your concerns about the COVID-19 vaccines, that you may make an informed decision on whether or not being vaccinated is right for you. Thank you.